Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Van Maren Show on LifeSiteNews.com. Today, we're going to be talking to somebody I've been friends with for quite a few years now. I actually met her the year her book, Abandoned, the Untold Story of the Abortion Wars, came out. And that is Dr. Monica Miller. She's a nationally known American pro-life leader. She's the founder and director of Citizens for a Pro-Life Society, and she's been active in the movement since 1976. She's also a professor of theology at Madonna University in Livonia. She's written several books, actually. Abandoned, I think, is a must-read for anybody who's interested in the history of the pro-life movement. And she's actually taken incredible photographs of aborted babies. Some of these photographs were actually featured in the New York Times. She's done pretty much every version of pro-life activism that there is, from civil disobedience and sit-downs and serving time in jail as a result of that, displaying the victims of abortion in public to show to people what actually is taking place behind closed doors, doing sidewalk counseling, where she actually invented or at least defined what is now known as the Chicago method of reaching out to women on the streets. And she also put out a book of abortion victim photography, which incidentally is a term that she coined, that has pictures of babies who have been aborted paired with reflections by different pro-life leaders who had to spend time with those photographs, really reflecting on them. I was privileged to be asked to write one of those testimonies. David DeLayden, Jill Stanek, Joe Scheidler, Abby Johnson, many other pro-life leaders also contributed to this book of heartbreaking photographs. So I wanted to talk to Dr. Monica Miller today about her life in pro-life activism, what it's like to join the pro-life movement and stay full-time, and why she made that decision, and what it's like to come face-to-face with the victims of abortion. So without further introduction, here is that conversation with Dr. Monica Miller. So, Dr. Miller, how did you first get involved in the pro-life movement way back in the 1970s?
Well, yes, I was actually just graduated from Southern Illinois University. I was 23, just 23 years old. So I was pretty young, and I had just gotten my degree in theater. People don't know that I have an actual theater background.
I didn't know that.
Right. Well, yeah, it's in my book. I think I talk about it briefly in the beginning of my book, Abandoned: The Untold Story of the Abortion Wars. And what happened is, actually, when I was 21 years old, so again, quite young, I had a very profound religious conversion and really started to take my Catholic faith very seriously, though I never had any doubts about the faith. But, let me just say that going off to college and then, to make matters worse, to major in theater was not exactly the most encouraging environment for the practice of the faith.
Right.
So, anyway, I went on a retreat during Holy Week in 1976 at the Newman Center at Southern Illinois University, and I met a woman there named Shirley Parks. And there was probably about 20 people on the retreat at the Newman Center, and she was one of the people on the retreat. And so we were going around the room introducing ourselves and, giving a little bit of a short bio of who we were and what we were up to and so on. And Shirley was involved in something called the pro-life movement.
Right.
So I had absolutely no idea what that was. It sounded exotic, the pro-life movement. And so, of course, it turns out that she was involved in, ending abortion. Now, Roe versus Wade was only 3 years old, decided in 1973. So this was not that long after Roe v. Wade. So I, became friends with Shirley, and she mentored me for a number of months, took me to meetings, gave me good books to read, and that was really my initiation into the movement. And not too long after that, I moved from Carbondale, Illinois, where I was living, of course, and I moved to Chicago to study theology. I gave up theater. I really did a complete 180, but in any case, I attended Loyola University in Chicago, and I met Joe Scheidler of the Pro-Life Action League. I know you've done an interview with Joe.
Yes. Yeah.
So at that time, maybe 24 years old. Joe was in his early 50s at that time. He's now 91 or 92 years old. So I've known him for a very, very, very long time. But in any case, I got involved in sidewalk counseling pretty quickly, spent a lot of time outside of Chicago abortion clinics, talking women out of abortions. And then well, here's the thing. The way I met Joe, actually, I attended a parish, St. Ignatius parish run by the Jesuits back then, that was close to the campus of Loyola on the far north side of Chicago. And again, another woman, Marcita Hecht, who was a faithful member of that parish, invited me to go to a meeting. And she said, yeah, some pro-life meeting in downtown Chicago. I said, okay, fine. So we get on the L train and we zoom down to the Loop, and we go to the offices of the Illinois Right to Life Committee. And Joe, at that time, was the executive director of Illinois Right to Life. And lo and behold, the meeting was to plan a sit-in at a Chicago abortion clinic. The clinic was called Concord Medical Services on Grant Street near the Loop. And I decided I'm in. When time came to raise our hands, so who's willing to risk arrest? My hand is shot right up because I figure, well, what excuses do I have? Not married, I have no children, and I'm just a graduate student, at Loyola. So we did that first sit-in, and we didn't even call them rescues yet, in March 11th of 1978, and so that was my first time that I met Joe, was at that planning meeting in early 1978. And I was 24 years old at the time. And so my first arrest for trying to defend unborn babies from abortion was when I was 24. And again, I talk about that sit-in rescue in my book, Abandoned, the Untold Story of the Abortion Wars. So that's pretty much, how I got involved. I started my own pro-life organization while I was still a graduate student at Loyola by then I had already graduated. I was teaching at a Catholic high school in Chicago.
Right.
And I founded Citizens for a Pro-Life Society before I went to Milwaukee to get my PhD at Marquette. So and I've been running Citizens for a Pro-Life Society ever since then.
So that kind of gives us a chronology, but when I think of why you got involved in the pro-life movement, it's been a couple of years since I read your book cover to cover, but the one scene, and there's a lot of really searing scenes throughout your book, and the way you weave literary quotes through the book too, I think is quite masterful in terms of maximizing the impact. But the one scene that always really sticks out to me, because this was my experience, and I think it's the experience of most people who end up working in the pro-life movement full-time, is the scene when you're leaning into your refrigerator, your hand is
Yeah.
on a carton of milk, and you suddenly realize that in a country where babies are being killed down the street, where real human beings are being dismembered and pulled apart, that we don't have any right to a normal life. And that's one
Yes.
that's really struck me, the idea that the babies have a right to life, but do we have a right to a normal life in a country that does not recognize that?
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up because there are other people who've read my book, Jonathan, who have told me that particular, those few paragraphs where I talk about that also impacted them. Jill Stanek, for example, some people might know who she is, but Jill Stanek also commented that I kind of characterized or described or got to the heart of what it means to really be involved in the fight, the struggle, the work to confront abortion and to end abortion. This sense that you can't live a normal life anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We're in an emergency mode, and your life is completely impacted by the realization that down the street from where you live, or within a half an hour's car drive or whatever, there's a building, there's actually a place where moms and dads walk in and execute, destroy innocent human life, and they do it with the sanction and the protection of law. And I felt very, very keenly that I couldn't just live a normal life. That the expected things, that a young woman, would be involved with, getting married and having children and finding a house to live in and getting an education and having a career. None of that mattered much to me in that moment. It really was a moment where I kind of just froze in midair, preparing lunch. Right? I mean, that's what I was doing. I had just come back from a couple of hours at an abortion clinic, and so that sense that I had to be seized by a radical act. I had to do something that was out of the ordinary in order to stop abortion, save lives, make an issue out of it. And I think I even talk about how I felt alienated from my own culture, even the country, the United States of America, where slogans like "Land of the Free" and "Home of the Brave," none of that. To me, it was just lies. There was no truth to it. That I could feel a certain alienation from the very country where I lived that allowed this kind of atrocity, this incredible injustice take place, and call it a right. The constitutional right to abortion. So. Yeah, that's interesting. I appreciate that you brought that up, and I think it really should, I think, be in some ways the way that pro-lifers do feel, that we have to we have to be disturbed. Abortion has to disturb us and cause us to do things that we wouldn't normally do, to take risks, to go way beyond our comfort zones. To be different, to be very different, and so I guess that's one of the things I definitely talk about in my book, right?
Yeah. Jill Stanek, for the listeners who don't know, is she works for the Susan B. Anthony list, and she's a longtime pro-life activist as well. One of the things I wanted to ask you, because you don't touch on it a lot in your book, and I asked Joe and several other people this question as well. We really want on this podcast to introduce people to the pro-life movement as it is and to help them understand what sort of sacrifices pro-life activists often have to commit to, and how their lives look as a result. And so after this realization that you could not live a normal life, setting aside your activism for a moment, because we're going to get to that, how has being a pro-life activist changed your life in terms of getting married, having a family, your career? Because, yeah, we're going to get to the arrests and especially your photography. But how has this just changed your life, especially as you would have seen it before that moment?
Well, I don't know quite how to answer the question except to maybe say that, to be involved in pro-life work, in a way, you literally wake up with it on your mind and you go to bed with it on your mind. You're always in tuned to what's happening, what other people are doing, initiatives that are taking place, whether it's legislation or problems that are happening at certain abortion clinics with violations of health codes and so on, and even the sidewalk counseling. When you talk a woman out of an abortion, we get accused, how ridiculous, but we get accused of just caring about talk the woman out of the abortion and then say goodbye, have a nice life. It's not like that at all. I mean, we are involved in the lives of these women for months, if not literally years, even after the baby is born. So there's a lot of work. Your life is really taken up with attending to, if you're doing sidewalk counseling, for example, and I've done thousands and thousands of hours of sidewalk counseling. In fact, just this past Good Friday, a couple of days ago, I was outside of an abortion clinic for 2.5 hours in Detroit, Michigan, not too far from where I live. So if you talk the woman out of an abortion, you're going to be involved in helping her financially, giving her advice, counseling, maybe intervening between her and her family, dealing with the boyfriend. So it really consumes you. Pro-life work consumes you, and it changes your life for that reason and for no other reason.
And so when you were going out and doing this activism, was there sort of discussions in your family about how that was going to look for you? Because you've done every kind of activism there is. You've done
right.
Civil disobedience at a time when, well, the beginning of the civil disobedience is it had not yet died out as a civil rights practice for African Americans fighting for their rights. You've been through dumpsters, which is one of the things that we'll be discussing here in a moment. And as you just mentioned, thousands of hours of sidewalk counseling. And so one of the things that many pro-life full-time activists have had to really grapple with is, how do you explain this to people who don't understand that your life can't be normal? We had Scott Klusendorf on a couple of weeks back, and he said that people don't join the pro-life movement. And in some ways, each person there has been summoned into it. But that might be hard for other people who aren't in the pro-life movement, but even share pro-life convictions, to understand.
Well, yeah, it's a hard question to answer in some ways, Jonathan. I can only speak from my own experience. I just realized, and I think this makes the difference, for a lot of people, abortion is an issue. And even if they're let's say for religious reasons, as well as maybe just plain old philosophical reasons, you're opposed. People are opposed to abortion. They don't like it. They know there's something wrong with it. They would support laws that reversed abortion. But as long as it's simply an issue among a lot of other issues, political and social and cultural, they will stay on the periphery. And I think what the difference is, for somebody who is going to shift from simply opposing abortion or being against it in their own, let's say, their own personal value system. I think the difference is that when you really understand in the deepest part of yourself that abortion destroys other persons, and that these other persons are real, and the unborn child is a personal someone, and they are exterminated at the rate in the United States anyway of about 3,000 a day, and you have to have that personal connection. And then you can't just go on and live your life. You have to do something. You got to join a group. You got to work at a pregnancy help center. You got to go on the pickets. Start a pro-life group at your church. Whatever it's going to be, a lobby for legislation. Work for pro-life candidates, because the true loss of life is you really taken it in. The killing becomes very real to you, and once that happens, things are going to be very different in terms of your own life and the way that you allow abortion to impact you personally. I think that is in many ways that's really the difference. It's kind of, again, we talk about my book, but when I was in jail, I served a 7-month jail term in Milwaukee for a rescue that I did back in 1989, and I was allowed. I don't know how I got away with it exactly. But I was allowed to take photos into the jail. Well, maybe because it was a Huber jail. So in other words, I got out on child care. I had 2 small children at the time, and I was allowed to take the photos of abortion victims into the jail with me. And a lot of times the inmates wanted to see the photos, and my fellow inmates would come up to me and want to say, "Hey, Miller, you got those abortion photos? We want to take a look at them." And so I would pull them out, and so I remember one time I was sitting on the floor with about maybe 5 or 6 of these inmates in a circle, and they were looking at the photos, handing them one to the other. And I actually, maybe I could read this from my book. I remember one inmate, her name was Camille, and she looked at one of the photos, and I saw this expression come across her face, and I knew exactly how she felt. There was a certain depth of realization, like some veil had been torn away, and the atrocity of abortion gets exposed to your mind and your heart and your soul in a way that you never understood it before, with the broken body right in front of her in that photograph. And I say in my book, the graphic images of the broken body shocked her into new depths of reality and emotion. Her feelings were frozen by the tragedy the broken, twisted bodies caused her to penetrate. I knew this feeling. Many years ago, when I first saw the photos of aborted babies in the Life or Death brochure, I went into a kind of shock. My emotions were frozen, as I was utterly unprepared for the horror and sorrow that the crushed bodies revealed to me. It is the reaction of that last pure part of the soul, confronted by the desecration of the holy, a desecration beyond what one can imagine. Yet, these unspeakable, unimaginable crimes took place and continue to take place. They are part of a terrible truth, as if a veil had been torn away to expose a glimpse of hell. The sight makes us tremble and weep, and the shock solidifies within us a great absolute no, as we refuse to be part of this terrible darkness. Our being is filled with resolve to stand against it. Nothing in this glimpse of hell can be right, and the evil of it all is incarnated in the broken bodies that cry to you for justice. Once you see the bodies with the right mind, you can never go back. They have taken you into their world. And I think that's the experience that you have to have on some level, where once you have that realization, you can never go back and live that normal life. And so you know that you're called to do something to end this atrocity.
I think before I move on to the photography, I do have to ask, just for the benefit of our listeners, because I know this, but they might not. What put you in jail for 7 months again?
Oh, we did a rescue in June of 1989 at the Imperial Medical Services Abortion Clinic in Milwaukee, and I got the book thrown at me. I really did. There was this very, very, very pro-abortion, aggressive special prosecutor, Jeffrey Kremers. I talk about him, of course, in my book, and he slammed me with 3 criminal charges, and I got convicted on all 3 counts. And the judge actually gave me a 9-month jail sentence, and I served 7 out of the 9 months.
Okay. Now, one of the things that I really wanted to discuss with you, because you're one of the few people who have actually come face to face many, many, many times with the abortion victims. And I have on occasion twice seen actual abortion victims. And so I know that it's a life-changing experience in a way that's hard to describe. And you've taken thousands of photographs of aborted babies. So let's sort of start at the beginning so people can understand this. Where did you begin dumpster diving, and when did you have the idea of retrieving dead babies from dumpsters?
Well, I have to say I never actually had the idea of doing it. It just sort of, if I could say, I was in the right place at the right time. But I was a graduate student studying theology at Marquette in Milwaukee. Though I had many contacts, many friends in Chicago. And Milwaukee is not that far from Chicago. It's about an hour and a half drive north. So it's not as if, I was that far away. But what happened is that Joe Scheidler and a guy that used to work for him, Andy Schulberg, Joe came to Marquette University to give a speech. And after the speech was over, we went out to a International House of Pancakes for coffee or whatever. And Andy Schulberg leaned over to me in the booth, and he said, "Monica, we found the mother lode." And I thought, what the heck is he talking about? Well, it turned out we had found out that a pathology lab in Northbrook, Illinois, somebody who worked at this pathology lab had called a fellow by the name of Conrad Wudgener. Conrad founded a string of pregnancy help centers in the Chicago area. He got an anonymous phone call from this employee of the lab, and she had told Conrad that there were fetuses out on the loading dock of the pathology lab in boxes. They were out for the trash pickup, and apparently this employee was having a pang of conscience. So in any case, she or he instructed Conrad on how it is that, you pro-lifers could do something. And so she instructed us on how we could actually get access to the loading dock and and get the bodies. So that was in 1988, which I'll come back to that in a minute because I should jump back to the year of 1987. 1987, there was an abortion clinic in Chicago called the Michigan Avenue Medical Center, right on Michigan Avenue, and I did hours and hours of sidewalk counseling at this abortion center when I was living in Chicago. And it turned out that make a long story short, we found out that the clinic was indeed dumping the aborted babies in the trash dumpster behind the clinic in the alley. So there's an alley off of Monroe Street that intersects with Michigan Avenue, and you go down into the alley, and there was a red-colored dumpster. And so this was in February of 1987. So we trekked in the dead of night to that alley and opened up the dumpster, and we found the bags that contained these heavy boxes, and sure enough, they were filled with aborted babies. And so that was my shall I say, introduction to retrieving the actual victims of abortion from the trash. And this retrieval project went on for about two and a half months, from February until April 25th, because I remember that date of April 25th. It was the last day that we took a box of these aborted babies out of the trash. I spent countless hours photographing the aborted babies, and this was back when you had to use 35 millimeter film, right? And negatives. And my friend Edmund Miller, who then eventually became my husband, he and I taught ourselves by kind of trial and error, if you will, how to do this photography. We had to rent the equipment. We didn't own 35 millimeter cameras, which even then cost hundreds of dollars,
right,
plus the lenses. We had to have special lenses for close up, because some of these babies were very, very tiny. They ranged, the gestational ages range from 6 weeks to 6 months. And again, I do talk about this in my book, Abandoned: The Untold Story of the Abortion Wars. Then we had to, of course, arrange for the burials for these aborted babies, and then I couldn't believe it, but 1988, basically 1 year later, I thought we're done. This is like a one-time thing, right, Jonathan? I mean, how often are you going to find aborted babies in trash dumpsters? But
right.
There it was a year later. We're at the loading dock at the pathology lab in Northbrook, Illinois. The lab was called Vital Med, and the retrievals of those aborted babies took about 10 months from February of 1988 through the month of late October of 1988. And I'll have to tell you, as hard as this is going to sound to the listeners of this program, we were living with the dead. We had boxes and boxes and boxes of aborted babies. We had so many. We had to find host homes. We had to find other places, because I had a spare bedroom filled with boxes of aborted babies. At the end of by the time we were finished with the retrieval, we had 5,000 bodies. And I felt like I not only living with the dead, but then planning these burials for these babies was like being in the funeral business. And one of the things that we did we knew exactly where these aborted babies were coming from, and what is the reason for that? How do we know? The boxes on the loading dock were these aborted babies literally were shipped in parcel post from the abortion clinics where they were aborted to the Vital Med pathology lab.
Right.
So the return labels were on the boxes. So they were coming from places like the Raleigh Women's Health Organization, the abortion clinics from all over the place: Fairfield, New Jersey; Fargo, North Dakota; Wilmington, Delaware; Chicago. There was one from Milwaukee. Ironically, a clinic where we did a lot of sidewalk counseling, the Metropolitan Medical Services. So all of these abortion clinics were shipping the victims to Vital Med. And I think all Vital Med was doing was simply opening up the boxes and then dumping the boxes on the loading dock. There's no way, there is absolutely no way that pathology lab was doing any examination, because there was absolutely impossible. They would have done nothing else, because we're talking thousands of aborted babies, and we didn't get all of them. If we got half of what, not even half of what was there over that 10-month period, but we made a decision, since we knew where the babies were coming from. We would contact the pro-lifers, like, for example, Fort Wayne, Indiana. And we contacted the pro-lifers in those various cities and gave them back the bodies, and then they conducted. So that caused a multiplication of grave sites all over the United States as a consequence of that. So that, and again, the photography that we conducted, people want to see, what the, the photos which are available. We don't even charge anything for these photos. They're at imagesofabortion.com. So Images of Abortion, all one word, imagesofabortion.com. I think we've got like 6 galleries of the photographs from the various places, and times when we did the retrieval.
So you realize that when there's a lot of people who will be listening to this who are not, full-time pro-life activists, who have never seen an aborted baby and probably never will in their entire lives, and this sounds kind of nuts. Especially considering some of the experiences that you've gone through, retrieving the babies, burying the babies. Could you sort of describe what your reaction to seeing these actual humans was, not on a philosophical level, but on how did it impact you personally to handle these tiny children? Because this is a very rare experience. It's an extraordinary experience. It's one that's specific to our age when we do this to children in our countries. What was that like?
Well, I have to say it's one of the saddest things I've ever done, and probably ever will do in my life. And the images stay with you all the time. I don't know. It's hard to say, because you're looking at something you're not allowed to look at. You're looking at something that the human eye is not meant to look at.
Right.
In some ways, I felt that the broken bodies, of the victims of abortion was a real time metaphor for the broken culture that we live in. For example, how shall I describe this? But everything is out of order, and what should be in place is out of place. So, for example, there's a photo, and it should be in the gallery, one of the galleries of the images of abortion.com. There's a photo I took of a foot of a 14-week aborted baby that was aborted at the Raleigh Women's Health Organization. And if you look at the photo, you'll see that there's something wrapped around the foot of the baby. What is that? It's the intestines. So a part of the intestine got wrapped around the leg, the ankle of this aborted baby, and so right there, you see that everything is out of place.
Yeah.
Everything is not where it's supposed to be, and so the desecration of the human body that happens in abortion, it just is a sign. It's a symbol. Symbolizes the whole disjointedness of culture, of the darkness that causes that kind of literally chaos, confusion. That is. I use the word incarnated into the broken bodies of the victims of abortion. You never can get it out of your mind. I mean, for example, I'll see a hand of a little baby, maybe a 1-year-old or a toddler, and it'll be cocked. It'll be positioned in a certain way, and it just reminds me of how one of the babies that we took out of the trash. So it's I don't know. You carry these babies with you wherever you go, really. Once you've encountered them and they become part of your life, and here's the other thing that has always greatly perplexed me. Back in 2008, we found the remains of aborted babies in a trash dumpster here in Michigan.
Right.
You've been at the grave for the Hodari babies, as we call them. So those babies are buried at Holy Sepulchre Cemetery in Southfield, Michigan. So in 2008, we retrieved aborted babies from the trash dumpster behind the Woman Care Abortion Clinic in Lathrop Village, Michigan. Happily, the clinic is now closed. But in any case, some of the babies were really pretty big. I mean, they were 19, 20 weeks gestation. Of course, they were doing abortions there through the 24th week of pregnancy, which is very ridiculous how it is in Michigan that abortion on demand through the 24th week, six months, perfectly healthy babies. And I thought to myself, as we're looking at these the feet and the hands of the babies that were getting out of the trash, and I thought, the abortionist Alberto Hodari, he sees exactly what we're looking at. These were dilation and evacuation abortions.
Right.
He has to remove these arms and legs and spinal columns and ribs and whatever out of the womb, and he sees exactly what I see, and I see exactly what he sees. But why do we see it differently? Right? When I see that foot, half an inch or 3/4 of an inch long, I see a human being, right? I see a human foot. That was the foot of a somebody. What does he see, right? He sees trash. I don't understand that complete disconnection to the reality of the unborn child. It's something, Jonathon, I just can't penetrate that darkness. I don't understand it, but it's there. It's the mystery of evil, I guess, that I can't penetrate that. How is it that I see a human being and he sees a piece of trash, literally throw it away in a dumpster? And
you put the baby, I believe you and Joe Scheidler did this together. Did you not at one point take the babies that had been aborted in a clinic and lay them out in front of the clinic to show people what was truly going on? You described this at one point. And what was the reaction to the people who were walking past, seeing the literal physical result of what was taking place in that building?
Right. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, the babies that we retrieved, and that were in that 2 to 3 month period in 1987. So the Michigan Avenue Medical Center, the building that housed the abortion clinic, was right on Michigan Avenue. If you're familiar with Chicago, if you looked down the street like half a block, you could see the entrance to the famous Art Institute of Chicago, and this was like almost directly across the street from Grant Park, well-known park in downtown Chicago. And there's a very wide sidewalk in front of the building. The clinic was up on the 6th floor, and Joe had the incredible idea of doing an on-the-street press conference, that these babies were found in the trash behind the clinic. So we had some of the bodies actually displayed on tables on the sidewalk. And, this is a very crowded sidewalk, people coming and going, people walking to wherever they're, going to work or going to lunch or whatever it is they're doing. And people would come up, and I watched, I'm literally, Jonathon, I watched with my own eyes the awakening of souls. People would come up, they would look at these bodies, and I remember a couple of African American women coming up, looking and saying, "Oh my gosh, those are real babies. Those are babies." It was a completely privileged moment for me to see that. And here's why. Here's I think what was so special about this episode is when we had those babies displayed and it was a warm day. It was like, I think, May 6th of 1987. It was a very warm day. It was bright sun, and why were we getting what I would of course say is the proper reaction to the injustice of abortion? And here's why. These people that were coming down the sidewalk, going to and fro in front of the display of these abortion victims, they had no prior preparation. So in other words, they couldn't psychologically protect themselves,
right,
with some sort of ideology about abortion. They weren't, they were confronted without any preparation, so that they couldn't rationalize abortion. They weren't coming and looking at the bodies of, prepared for some sort of political protest where they could deny the truth, rationalize the situation. It was a pure reaction to the violence of abortion and so then the reaction emotionally and maybe I could even say spiritually was pure. It was a pure reaction, and it was incredible. It really was.
So I guess we could talk for hours about your book and your history in the pro-life movement, because as you mentioned, you've been doing pro-life work since 1976. But we'll close off just by asking you what you've been up to lately, because you've been embarking on a new project that readers of LifeSite News will have heard of, because they've reported on what you're up to extensively. I've also written and interviewed you on what you've been up to, but yeah, I guess just give us a rundown of your newest project that you've been engaging with, and most importantly, just briefly the core philosophy behind what that is.
Right. I've been involved in a pro-life ministry called the Red Rose Rescues. And, some people, may be familiar with the rescue movement itself that was very up and running back in the 1980s and in the early 1990s, where people would gather literally by the hundreds, if not the thousands, all over the United States and block the door, sit-ins. I mean, basically that's what we're doing in terms of the technical, activity, but blocking the door to the clinic to prevent the abortions from taking place and so on. Well, and I was very involved with that as well, but we decided a group of us to bring back the rescues, but we're doing them somewhat differently. We're actually going with a small team of 4 to 6 people. We will go into the abortion center, sit down quietly next to the moms that are scheduled for abortion, and talk to them in the waiting room of the abortion clinic. And these are women, maybe there were some sidewalk counselors, but these are women that didn't listen to the sidewalk counselors. They decided to go on in the clinic anyway. And literally, we're talking minutes away from these women walking down the hallway of death to the execution rooms to kill their unborn children. So this is really our last effort to reach out to these mothers and provide them with help, our encouragement, and get them to come out with us. If they don't listen, we're going to stay, because part of the Red Rose Rescue, and a very, very important dimension of the rescue, is to stay with the victims, because these are abandoned children who have nobody to love them, nobody to defend them, nobody to stay with them. And so we will abide with them. We will throw ourselves into solidarity with the unwanted and try to stay inside the abortion clinic for as long as we can. And we know from our experience, Jonathan, that as long as we're there, sitting there, praying, maybe singing hymns, talking to the staff, people that work at the clinic, as long as we're there, the abortions are not happening. So we're actually defending those babies by just being there with them for as long as we possibly can. So that's a very important part of what we do, and I help people try to understand the spirituality behind it by referring to something that Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta, said that characterized her work in India, was to actually go to the dark holes of the poor. Go to the dark holes of the poor. Not that the poor are going to come to you, but you're going to go to them. And you're going to be with them in the dark place where they are living, the darkness that they are experiencing. And that's what we're trying to do in a Red Rose Rescue. And literally, we will take roses into the clinic. We will pass them out, give them to the staff, give them to the police if they'll take the roses. And we have had some successes. Women have left the clinics. Some of them actually during the Red Rose Rescues, even before the police get there. So we know that at least those babies were not murdered that day. We hope that the moms didn't come back, but we do have experience that the Red Rose Rescues have stopped the killing of the unborn for those women that got up and decided to leave. And sometimes boyfriends were with them, and they and they left. I did a short jail term last summer because of one of the rescues, one of the Red Rose rescues that we did here in Michigan. Which, by the way, I should say, we know that rescue stopped on that very day of the rescue, which was December 2nd of 2017. We know that it stopped at least 12 abortions. And how do we know that? Because the clinic director testified with a chart that 12 women left the clinic when the rescue, and not left the clinic, but didn't show up, didn't come during, and she says it's never happened in the 30-year history of this abortion center, where 50% of our clients did not get their abortions. So that was a huge victory. I couldn't believe she was actually testifying. Because basically she was giving us encouragement by saying, look how successful they were. But if people want to know more about Red Rose Rescue, we have a Facebook page. So you can just Google Red Rose Rescue Facebook. It'll take you to the Facebook page. There's lots of articles and links and photographs that are up there. And also I'd like to direct people to my website, which also has an archive for Red Rose Rescues on the left sidebar, and that is prolifesociety.com, no hyphens. It's all one word, prolifesociety.com. And also, since we were talking at great length about the aborted babies that we took from the trash and so on, I'd like to direct people to a YouTube video, if I can, Jonathan.
For sure.
One of them is called "Aborted Babies on TV." So just Google that when you get to YouTube. Put that in the search box. "Aborted Babies on TV," and that'll bring up a video, indeed, of a TV show we did in Milwaukee, and the aborted babies were displayed in this interview that we did. Also, our video Requiem for the Disappeared. So again, you can just put that in the YouTube search box, Requiem for the Disappeared. And it is a 4-minute music. I'm going to characterize it as a kind of music video, but it's about the burials that we did for the aborted babies that we found in Michigan.
Well, Dr. Miller, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and talk about your work with us.
Thank you, Jonathan, and God bless you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was my conversation with Dr. Monica Miller. She is a director of Citizens for a Pro-Life Society, and we hope that you'll check out other interviews on lifesitenews.com. You can head over there and you can read coverage of day-to-day events, things that are taking place in the culture wars. You can check out our previous interviews and subscribe to them. We hope you'll go to lifesitenews.com, check out more of the coverage there, and we hope you'll join us again next week.